Good morning, everyone. I am Pastor Phil Henseling from Institutional Ministries. Last week I had the occasion to have a man who is dear to my heart, Officer Matt, with me. Today I have another officer who's very dear to my heart. This is Diane. Diane is a retired officer who has had PTSD, who struggles with PTSD, who understands PTSD better than she would like to. So her insights into our lessons that we have today will be very from the gut for her and very honest because she knows exactly what it is all about. So we'll be digging into a topic that she'd like to not know anything about. Post-traumatic stress is our topic. You have a text-in number up there. I've inserted that into a number of slides so that as we go, you'll be able to come back to that and see the number again if you aren't able to get it written down right away. We invite you to text in and give us any extra information or extra questions that you might have so that we can provide that information to you. So I gave you a promise. This is my promise. I said that today I would recognize the fact that the term PTSD has been kind of popularized. I hear people who go around saying, oh, I had this little, I bumped my leg the other day. I think I have PTSD. And so they become almost silly in the way they use the word PTSD. And last week I said to you, no officer said this to me out loud, but I think inside their heads they have to have their eyes roll back and they think if they only knew what PTSD was really like, they wouldn't be making a joke like that or insinuating that they have PTSD when they haven't got a clue what it's really about. People know enough about cancer that they don't say, oh, I think I have cancer because I bumped my leg yesterday. In the same way, they wouldn't do it with PTSD if they truly understood it. So we've got a lot of learning to do in this area. We're going to try to help you understand how PTSD is different than the typical trauma, how trauma can snowball in intensity until it becomes PTSD, and then look a little bit of how to heal. And the next week, we'll go even deeper into looking at how it affects a life and how we help someone understand it, work with it, and apply it in a long-term way to their lives. And that hint I gave you at the end there, Americans just like quick fixes with everything. So COVID has been really, really tough for America because we've never had to do anything this long, So PTSD is long-term, it's tough. It's not an easy fix for anybody. And that's one of the hardest things that wears on you. So I know, Diane, you've heard from a doctor, if I understood right, who said, the big thing isn't the PTSD, it's the depression that can follow. It's the long-term effect that the PTSD can cause. So with that introduction, post-traumatic stress, what is it? I want to start by just talking about what stress is for a minute. Stress is an emotional reaction to having had a crisis. Everybody has stress. You might have seen a stress measurement tool that's out there that will measure if you've had this happen in your life or this happen in your life or this happen in your life. These are measurements of stress. And if a bunch of them happen together at the same time and you can add those numbers up, that's bigger. So I can tell you, for instance, that right now I have quite a bit of stress. I have quite a bit of stress because my bathroom's being redone and we have a house with one bathroom. And that means I'm having to live someplace else part-time to be able to use a bathroom. And I have people who are at my work who stopped being at my work, and I have some new people who are being hired, and they're great people. Not any problem with who I've got, but the changeover means I have to do new teaching. I got a new stress. I'm here today. This is a stress. So I got a bunch of stresses all compounded, and I got another one because my mother is 92 and took a fall 2 weeks ago and broke her hip, and is now in a home where I can't go see her. So another stress. So yeah, they pile up on us. That's stress. That's normal reaction to situations that come into our life. You have a crisis, you have a turning point, something happens. And at that turning point, like I got the phone call, my mom had fallen. That's a crisis point. Now what do you do with that? You have different directions you can go at that point, and the way that's handled will change how your future works. Some of the biblical words that we'll find out there are trial, tribulation, persecution, affliction, and out in society we hear these kinds of words like suffering and hardship and adversity and pain. It's traumatic if that problem affects my emotional and my physical and especially my spiritual self long term. It's traumatic. So I fall and I smack my knee. Well, that's a problem, but if it was an accident that I got hit by another car and I saw the car coming at me, and now I wake up in the middle of the night with nightmares of that car coming at me, that's traumatic. That's beyond just typical stress. Now I've got something that's a reaction to it. And if it's happening afterward, that's post-traumatic. So it's continuing after the situation. It's normal to be under stress when it's happening. Post-traumatic means the wake up afterward thinking about it, or having it relive in your mind. And if that doesn't get healed, that's when we can get to the deeper problem of post-traumatic injury or post-traumatic disorder. So we'll be coming to that in a minute. First of all, stress. Stress can be good or bad. And so they have fancy words for it that psychologists use. Eustress is good stress and distress is bad stress. Eustress, a good example of that would be I got married. We had this wonderful day we were all excited about, this big, big day of marriage, right? And all the trimmings. Well, that was a stressful day if you look back to it for those of you who've been there, right? That was a stressful day. It was a good day, but man, there was a lot of stress, a lot of things. And maybe right at the very end, when the last pieces were coming together, you found yourself snapping at each other in ways you wouldn't have otherwise because of stress. So good stress, but it still drains. And then negative stress is all the more draining, all the more tough on you as you deal with it. Usually, stress involves something that's not our normal. I don't get married every day, so that was a stress. You know, it was different than I've ever done ever before. I haven't gotten married again. I'm still married, so it's only happened once. Other things that aren't in the normal, you don't ever do these things day to day on a daily basis on purpose, like have an accident or get involved in a crisis where someone is having an injury and you've got to deal with it, or whatever it may be. Those suddenly, there they are. You didn't plan to be in those situations. Those are extra stressful, and so you may or you may not handle it well. An officer, a first responder, is trained to handle things like that. That doesn't mean that it's easy for them to handle it, even though they've been trained for it. We have something inside of us that psychologists would call back talk, or talk back, whichever way you want to say it. This is my mind inside working and talking to itself. And you do it all the time. You might not stop and think about it, but you do it all the time. Some people do it out loud. I'm driving along and I get upset, and then I tell myself, no, you shouldn't have gotten upset. You should have calmed down. Chill out. That's talk back. Chill out. It wasn't that big of a deal. Yeah, she did cut you off, or yeah, he did cut you off, or yeah, this happened, or whatever, but there wasn't an accident. I don't have to get all upset about it. I don't have to have road rage. Chill out. That's this talk back thing that goes on. It's normal for you to do that. It's not so good when your mind isn't level. So here are some ways that your mind might not be level, and it might affect the way that you have talk back happen inside yourself. Some people have been brought up from little on with polarization thinking. So it's only good or it's only bad. There's no middle ground. Everything's white and black. As kids, we're more tended to go that direction anyway. Kids like things white and black. It's easy to understand that way. But as we grow, we realize that not everything is white and black. There are these places in between where we aren't as easily able to say that's definitely good and that's definitely bad. There are places where you have to have a struggle in between those two. And if you've been brought up to think that there is no middle ground, when you come to situations in life that are tough, you're going to have a harder time dealing with them. A second type of distortion is what we call negative thinking or awfulizing. This is the person who can never see anything good in anything. I listened to a really good sermon as I drove here. Well, if I want to awfulize it, then I would have to say, well, he was too young, and he's way younger than me, and so I'm going to come up with reasons why it couldn't be good. That's awfulizing. The next one, overgeneralization. You always do that. You never do that. That's a really good way to fight. It's not a good way to live your life. When these things control us, they're really, really bad. And so often when you look at a relationship that's abusive in any way, this is a tendency that you'll see in that abusive relationship. When a cop gets called on scene, often they may be meeting someone who is one of these three. And they have to partly be psychologists. They didn't go into their job thinking, I'd like to be a psychologist. And yet, many times when they arrive at a scene, they're dealing with people who are in one of these categories, and they have to work with what's going on there and what abuse is happening because of it. Another thing that's a problem in this area is self-esteem. So my self-esteem, if this is who I am and this is what I'm living with every day, my self-esteem sinks lower and lower and lower and lower until maybe the person is suicidal. It just is a really hard life to live. Over against that, I want to talk about what I'm going to call Christ esteem. Self-esteem, every time something good happens in my life, man, am I good. And every time something happens bad in my life, oh, I'm just the pits. Because you're evaluating your life upon yourself and your accomplishments or your failures, the way someone treats you or doesn't treat you. And so that's always all over the place problem. But how much am I worth in Christ's eyes? He said, you are worth my blood. You are worth my death. God the Father said, you are so important to me that I'm giving my son for you. That's how much we're worth. That's Christ esteem. That's understanding that my value system isn't based on me. Big picture isn't based on me. It's based on what God has done for me and what he does in me. That's his work. He gave me value. When we understand that, that really can help us change our perception in all those other areas, even if we've had a bad upbringing. Now, I'm going to get into some scientific stuff here a little bit about what happens inside the brain to help you understand what happens in a stress situation. So, the thalamus is the control tower. It's like the 911 center. It receives the message. And it passes its message immediately to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is the place that converts it into chemicals. And chemicals are instant almost in their reaction. So very, very fast. Electrical chemical response center that handles it. So if you were to do this in the 911 way, you'd say, the thalamus says 911, how can I take your call? And the hypothalamus says, I've got a line connected to that fire station or that police department or whatever, and the bell's going to ring, the lights are going to go off immediately at that spot. That's what's going on. The hippocampus is the translation and memory center, and it starts the cameras rolling. And when you think of a camera, you think of sight, don't you? But this camera records smell, sight, taste, feel, every sense is triggered at the same time. It's going click, 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 really, really fast, taking as fast action pictures of everything that happens in that moment of that high stress. So when I'm talking to an officer about a situation like this, we just heard in our discussion with officers a few days ago, I can smell the grass. I can smell the grass where my incident happened. I can still smell the body burning. I can still hear the crunch of the metal. I can still hear the scream. And they might wake up in the middle of the night and they're in that. It might be right there present with them like it's today again. And all the smells are there. It's just, it's incredible what the ability of the hippocampus is to record, and it does fast action recording in the moment of stress. And it seems to put it on not the part of your memory that seems to wash it away again, but it seems to hold there in its forever memory. The frontal cortex, the front part of your brain, is a CEO that says, I'm going to think this through, I'm going to make a plan here, I'm going to figure out how to solve this situation. And in the meantime, the amygdala is a part of the brain that says, until you get it figured out, I'm going to be in control. And I'm going to either say we're going to run right now, we're going to freeze and hide, or we're going to fight. We're going to do one of these right now, but we're going to take immediate action until you, the CEO, gets it figured out what to do next. We're the response team, and we handle it until then. We're going to comment? Oh. Click on.
Is this a spot where
Anytime. Anytime.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. I just wanted to share an experience that relates to what Pastor Henslin is describing. First of all, as a child, I had some unidentified trauma. So I was placed in a caretaking role at a very early age. So it was a natural progression for me to make choices where I'm always taking care of everybody else, and had no idea the trauma that had been done to my spirit. So when Pastor Phil is talking about how, well, let me just say this again. As an officer, we were trained to go into any situation, active shooters, whatever the crisis was, we had no time to process that fear. And when you think about discernment and how the Holy Spirit works, there's some slowing down there. There's some fear because you're stopping, you're praying, you're listening, you're waiting. We don't have that as a first responder, whether it's military, police, fire. So man with a gun call, building checks, you just blow past all that fear. So I had no idea what fear meant, whether it was trying to harm me or protect me. That's discernment. Didn't have that ability. It does a number on your brain, where you start responding to everything. And as I share these experiences, sometimes I lose my train of thought, so forgive me. Something else I wanted to add, with the heightened senses and perception, there were different traumatic events that I responded to, a horrific, well, every murder scene is a horrific scene, but one in particular that stood out of my mind was the suspect tried to clean the scene with bleach. So every time I was around that smell, even cleaning some mold off a shower, I instantly was taken back to that scene. My divorce was a very traumatic event for me. And at the time, my son was swimming in college. So again, I started cleaning a shower, and this was years later, and that bleach smell just took me right back to that event. I had to stop what I was doing. It was, and as an officer, we had to study the scene, we had to take it in, we had to describe the smells, we had to describe what people were saying, what, in my field, or my role as a police officer for many years was sexual assaults of women and children. And I even had a male victim, of course. And so you're writing a report, you're taking notes, and everything you're taking in, it affects you. So whether you're the victim or whether it's just compassion fatigue or whatever it's called, it's affecting you. And think of a lifetime, a career of what that can do to your soul.
Thank you. What she talked about with the smell, that's sometimes called a trigger. That triggers what you had before. It takes you back to what you had before. It puts you back in the moment all over again, the moment that you're trying to forget, but you can't. That's a trigger. Rebounding is what we'd like to normally have happen. Rebounding, I'll talk about it a little more in just a minute, but the control tower sees a high stress. In microseconds, it sends that high stress message to the hypothalamus that should now respond with chemicals. And right away, the amygdala says, I've got to do something about this. We either need to run right now, I need to start fighting right now, or I need to freeze and hide right now like a rabbit would. Whichever one of those is the appropriate response right now, we're going to start doing that. And it might choose the wrong one, you might say, if you look at it later. But it chooses, and you don't necessarily get a lot of choice in which one it chooses. It's so instantaneous. As Diane said a moment ago, there's no real discernment happening in the amygdala level. Then the hippocampus starts taking those flash pictures, and while all this is now going on, now the front of your brain, the CEO part, starts to think now and say, what's going on here? What do I need to do? How should I react to this? And that's where I'll go back to my 2 days ago. I'm turning a corner. Someone else decides to turn the corner from the opposite side. I'm making a right. I have the right of way. Someone approaching me decides to make a left right in front of me. I can do it fast enough. We met in the intersection like this. If I would have kept going, I would have broadsided them as they were turning in front of me, going really fast. And suddenly they hit the brakes along with me, and so now they're in front of me looking really sheepish, of course. And that's at that moment when you feel angry, right? And the A up there, the amygdala says, ram 'em good. Bam! That's the amygdala fight right now. That was my immediate feeling. But that was wrong. I knew that was wrong. And that's where now your CEO, the frontal cortex, takes over and says, no. We're going to think this through. We're going to chill out. We're going to do the right thing here. That's not the way to react in this situation. The officer's having to do all those things in seconds. And hopefully now the stress goes away. And if it goes away, then the hippocampus starts sending out calm down messages. It sends calm out messages. The hypothalamus sends the chemical that washes those out again and helps you calm down, and you go back to an at-rest level. So to help you see it better, think about it better, I want you to think about a ball bouncing in just a second, but I have this in here first. This might take from a few hours or days to up to 6 weeks, but here's what it's like. Think about a basketball bouncing, and that ball bounces and then goes bounce, 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 bounce. And that's also the way that your mind handles the situation. It's huge. It's pretty huge. It's not so huge. It's not so huge. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. That's how it should work. You've had an accident. Someone rear-ended you. And you find that you don't want to get back in the car, maybe. And then you do get back in the car, but you're just looking at that rear view mirror all the time. And then after a week or so, you don't have to look at the rear view mirror anymore the way you used to do. It's calmed down, it's going away. It might take weeks, but it's calming down and going away. That's what we'd like to have happen. If the rebounding does not happen, if that doesn't work, then the brain remains in that constant emergency. We got an emergency happening, we got to respond to the emergency, there's an emergency, there's an emergency. And the chemicals are just flowing inside the brain, and that increases very highly the chance of then having a post-traumatic stress injury happen in the brain, because the chemicals can do like a tattoo in the brain, actually cause an injury that causes what's called the disability. One of the ways that we try to work with this is what's called right brain, left brain thinking, or action. We do right brain to left brain thinking when we analyze things, but one of the best ways then to handle working with this stress is to go have a workout, because right brain, left brain are working, and right side and left side are working. And so things that involve both sides of you, things that involve working back and forth, things that involve looking from this eye to this eye, things that involve even electronic things from one side to the other. They will help sometimes to then take down the stress process. Now, a little bit about PTSD. It is a brain injury. It has the severity of a concussion. Now, when you think of a concussion, concussions are all different types, right? So are PTSD. So that when I say the severity of a concussion, it might be a mild concussion, it might be a concussion that is totally destroying. But it has that severity. It could be either one, and any place in between. It is a real illness. It's not just in the person's head. Well, it is in their head, but it's not just in their head. It literally has done damage to the brain, literally, when it is post-traumatic stress injury. The person will feel stressed and fearful after the danger is over. One of the things that you will know about an officer who's had PTSD, let's say we're at the restaurant. Where would you want to eat, Diane, in the restaurant if you're an officer with PTSD? This room.
My back against the wall so I can see everything, particularly the entrance.
And ready to be able to
fight.
Or move out that door if needed, right? So where's the exit? Where do I need to go if I need to get to an exit? How do I make sure that I'm watching every direction? Those kinds of things that you wouldn't even think about are just natural after a while. And they're a good natural to an officer, but they become more than just natural with PTSD. They become something that's haunting. And I've talked to officers who said, my wife was really struggling because she'd say, let's go out to eat. And we'd arrive at, well, pick the name of whatever restaurant you want, Applebee's or whatever. We arrive at Applebee's and we look around and I say, nope. Okay, let's go down to the steakhouse. We get down to the steakhouse and I look around and say, nope. Why am I saying nope? Because the seat that's open is right here and it's in the middle of the room and it's far from an exit and people are behind my back and I can't handle it. I won't be able to sit there and eat because there could be a shooter behind my back. Now that's not real, but it is to that man right now who's at that kind of PTSD at that level. It's absolutely real. It's going to destroy his entire day. And it's going to destroy his wife's day and his kids' day too. So it's haunting. It's heavy stuff. It starts at different times for different people. And people ask, well, you know, what is it that causes it or whatever? And we can't really answer that. We can't answer why. Sometimes this really seems to be easy for someone to get it, and other times it doesn't seem to be that big of a deal. One of the answers I'll give you, though, is that I believe that if you have a way to release your stress, it'll help you. So I picture, maybe my picture's faulty, but my picture that I use is think about blowing up a balloon. I blow up the balloon and then I tie it shut. That's a guy with PTSD or a girl with PTSD. The balloon is blown up tight. It's ready to pop. And if I come along with a pin, pow. But if I could take a hypodermic needle, you know, one with a hole in the center, and poke it through the knot and wait slowly and let it just sizzle along, it'll decrease, won't it? And so that's what I see our working with an officer is doing. We're there to be with God's word and with comfort and with care. We're to be the one who puts the needle in through the knot, not through the side, where it's safe, where they can feel safe, and let them distress a little bit of it slowly and hopefully get closer back to normal. That's our goal. Signs of PTSD could start soon after and continue, or they could start many, many months later. I know people that got PTSD immediately in a situation. I know a story of a man that didn't seem to have any PTSD that they were aware of. And he actually quit his high-stress job, took a job with, I think it was a lumber yard, doing well. And he happened to be at a site that was next to a gun range. And somebody at the gun range had a piece of ammo that hit a metal target and bounced and got him in the leg. It was just a superficial wound, but he developed full-on PTSD at that moment. And why then? I can't explain. I can just tell you that that's how it happened for that man. So very different for different people. Diane?
Telltale PTSD symptoms, at least for me and others that I've seen, is you can't talk about the event without sobbing. That's traumatic. I guess that's a huge red flag.
Here are some symptoms: bad dreams, flashbacks of the original event, that's huge. Disturbing thoughts, these thoughts are coming at you at different times of the day or night. They might be keeping you awake at night. They might be invading what you want to do in your normal day, like I can't go eat at this place because of the disturbing thought of that shooter that might be behind me. Avoiding places and activities that used to be normal for me. I just gave you an example of that. Feeling worried or guilty or sad. It's affected the rest of your emotions and often has involved depression. Feeling alone, having trouble sleeping, on edge and especially around people. Angry outbursts. One of the ways that we deal with our upsetness is to get angry. It's a real common secondary emotion. When I say secondary emotion, I don't know if everybody understands what I mean by that. Let me give you an example. My kid runs out in the road right in front of a car. My kid is 3 years old, takes off running, runs right in front of a car. And by God's grace, the car can stop in time. And between when I see this begin to happen, feel total panic and get to my child, the only feeling that's going on in me is panic and terror, right? But when I get to the child, all that adrenaline that has produced in that time that I was getting to the child is still there. All that fluid has, that chemical change has happened in me and it's still in me. And now terror isn't the right emotion anymore, so it switches to typically anger. What were you thinking? And right there you can be abusive. Right at that moment you can be terribly abusive. What were you thinking? And if you're shaking the child like I just showed, you have a problem, right? It was a natural next reaction, but the shaking the child, right there you could have child abuse happen. That moment. So recognize that this secondary emotion takes over when high stress has happened. This person is in high stress all the time. How easy to be in secondary emotion a lot of the time. How easy. Thoughts of harming yourself or others. Most often it's self. Often is angry at yourself for not just getting over it or not just being able to handle the situation, or how did I get myself in that situation to begin with, or whatever other false picture that they're giving themselves. They did the right thing at the time, and now they're beating themselves up as if they did the wrong thing. And that's just a real common guilt thing. Satan does that to us all the time, tries to make us guilty even when we did the right thing. And an officer often is struggling in that issue. Go ahead, Dan.
I'll just relate another experience as it applies to what Pastor just said. I interviewed hundreds of children over the years who had been physically and sexually abused. And to try to develop a rapport with them in a short period of time and then get some piece of valuable information from them, it took a tremendous amount of work for me. I just had to be completely empathetic and feel their pain and understand what their body language was telling me. I had a child disclose just terrible sexual abuse while they were hiding in the toy chest in the interview room because they were so afraid somebody was going to hear them say it. And so that, to me, that was a fight, an internal fight, because I was trying so hard to protect them. Well, surprisingly enough, many of the mothers who had sexually abused children were also victims. So it brought up a lot of things for the mothers that they never dealt with, and their reaction to the child was anger and disbelief, especially if it was a paramour, a boyfriend, and the mothers would have horrible outbursts at their children, for lying. And so I'd have to fight with the mothers to get them to believe, and then I would go to a case review at the prosecutor's office, and I would have to fight and advocate for that child, to take it to court to find some justice. And then if there was a prosecution, on the stand, I was attacked, by a defense attorney and made to feel terribly incompetent, that I had forgotten some details that's just one case, and I sometimes had 11 reports of sexual abuse in 1 week, along with many other kinds of crises. So I'm not trying to make you feel sorry for me, but just to give you a perspective of what an officer might be going through.
PTS victims may be angry with themselves. If they're angry, what I want you to do, I want you to stop and realize what Martin Luther says about the use of law and gospel. He says we're good at giving the gospel to other people, but we're not so good at giving the gospel to ourselves. If you tell me that you are a repentant sinner, I should give you the gospel. I should give you the gospel. I should tell you that your sins of which you've repented are forgiven in Christ completely. They are washed away. They are gone in Christ. But you go home and say, oh, you dirty, rotten thing, you deserve to feel like this and that's what you're doing to yourself. So you're continuing to apply the law to yourself instead of the gospel. That's so common that we struggle with this in our internal lives, and people with PTSD often are caught in that game. Satan always tries to play the blame game inside of our hearts and our minds. They may self-exclude, and if they do, they're going to be cutting their emotions with their friends, their family, and so on, and they need those ties to heal, and yet they're trying to exclude themselves because maybe a fear of how they'll act or what's going on or the way it went last time. They may self-medicate. I've been at a presentation done by an officer who said, why is it that at the beginning of the career, if you were to take officers and the rest of the public and you said, who are the ones who will never use drugs, who will always obey the law, and the officers would all be on the one side of the room, this is how we're going to be, this is who we are. And yet, farther into their career, a bunch of them are using drugs, are using alcohol, have done things that have broken the law now. What's happened, and his point is, PTSD has broken the person and it's caused them to do things that they would never do before. And one of the things that they do is, I'm hurting so badly, the pain is so great that I'm going to get rid of the pain. And so I'll use something to kill the pain. And killing the pain means I do other things wrong. So I can think of an officer who was deeply disgraced because he was found in a stupor, half inside of his police car, with his gun laying on the ground after having been out one night. And the rest of the public was, what an idiot, this awful guy, the rotten person, we got to get this guy off the force. And my reaction was, my heart breaks for this man. He is struggling deeply, and most of the people have no idea what he's going through. He is deeply struggling and is showing by what's happening in his life right now. Yeah, right now he needs to be off the force because right now he needs to fix himself. Yes, he does. But we need to know how he got there and help him with the problem he's got right now. Self-harm. Intrusive suicidal thoughts can easily be there. Both Diane and I know what it's like to have a friend who's been here. Very painful to see someone in this situation and to have to deal with it. They may feel numb, not only physical, emotional numbness, I was going to say, but also physical numbness. They might be numb in their hands and feet and so on. And why would they feel numb even in their hands and feet? Why would it not just be in their emotions? Because PTSD is a real brain injury. A real brain injury. Are they punishing themselves, or are they being punished? Are they avoiding pain? What's going on? You have to ask it as you look at this person. And is there evidence here of the moral injury that we talked about last week? And I'm going to tell you to this last one, absolutely, and almost I pretty much could say always. Always, absolutely, evidence of moral injury. It happens wider than just first responders, but boy, it's so often so much behind what happens with PTSD.
It's usually at this stage that an officer might make the headlines, you know, because you need to do something to make yourself feel something, because your emotions are so shut down. You're not allowed to show emotion on the job, and so the high-risk behavior lifestyle, that's usually what that's about. And so you get the scandalous affairs, you know, the drunk driving, the whatever. That usually makes the headlines, and that's where people just go, oh my gosh, these officers are so corrupt.
Thank you. I just realized I didn't put that on my list, and that should be on there. High-risk behavior should definitely be on the list. When they become unable to feel anymore, then one of the answers to that, just like one of the answers might be self-harm or self-medicate, it might be find a way to feel again. So it might be that they used to like a nice car, but now they get in a car and they drive 150 miles an hour, where they wouldn't have done that before. Or now they are willing to bungee jump, free fall, and never would have thought of doing it that way before, but now they will. And hey, if my life is taken, so what? It'll be a good, it's almost like, see if God might use this to kill me. And if he does, it's not suicide then, because it happened a different way. So, hey, I'll be out of my pain, and in the meantime, I'll feel alive for a few moments. And so that false justification can happen really, really easily. Ongoing pain, ongoing PTSD, PTS causes a brain injury, the PTSI, and then the resulting disability, the PTSD. And the interesting thing I want you to know here is that the hippocampus actually can shrink inside the brain, and parts of the brain can go dark. They stop functioning, they turn off, they go into shutdown because the flood has happened so much so long. And so the frontal cortex, that CEO part, is not able to do the thinking it wants to do. Diane has made a comment to me that a bunch of you have seen my PTSD or my moral injury handout that I have. She made the comment to me that she appreciated that I had some pieces in larger print on there, because she said at the worst point, I couldn't make myself read that deeper print. It wouldn't have made sense to me. It's like my mind couldn't get there when I was in my worst situation. It wouldn't get there. And that flooding is so intense, it's so great that the thinking part of the brain is hijacked in its ability to do proper thinking anymore. I don't know how else to say it. Go ahead. You'll do a better job at it.
Well, all I'm doing is relating personal experiences with what you're describing. When I broke, I mean, I think I had lots of breaks along the way, but I never identified them as breaks, because as a cop, you know, you don't break. You don't be weak. And you also don't talk about this stuff with civilians who maybe have a normal, healthy, balanced lifestyle. You only relate it to other cops because they've seen the same insane kind of chaos that you have. They're the only ones who get it. Back to my worst day was like a perfect storm. I was going through a divorce. I lost my support system. My children were in crisis. I worked in the domestic violence unit, and I was asked to investigate a case involving another officer. this victim, who happened to be homosexual, she began stalking me. Wouldn't stop calling me and was writing me letters and just crazy stuff. Well, the officer ended up getting fired. And now I was asked to testify against him, and the union was supporting him. So here's my police family, and I'm the enemy. I have an adopted intellectually delayed daughter who was, very much in crisis because, here was another piece of rejection in her life, and she was attacking me on a daily basis, either physically or verbally. I hate you, I'm going to kill you. That was the perfect storm going on for me. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I lost a tremendous amount of weight. But now I was the insurance provider for my children. I had to keep moving. So my daughter threatened my son and I, and had to call the crisis worker. The crisis worker came to my house, and the crisis worker told me to call 911. I couldn't. Wait a minute. I mean, my mind was in slow motion. I am 911. I didn't know how to dial the phone. I just was stuck in pain. And the caseworker called. My daughter was maybe 12 at the time. Police came to my house. I went to answer the door, and my daughter grabbed my arm away from the door. Well, the officer came bursting into my house and put her on the ground, handcuffed her. And, my life was just in slow motion at that point because I just couldn't wrap my head around what was happening in my police world, in my family. So when Pastor Phil talks about, your brain being flooded, I could only understand very few words, short kinds of statements. I think that's what you're describing.
Also, the slow motion is very commonly described in the moment of the deep, deep crisis. That it's like everything, when I said that snapshot, snap, 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 while that's going on, in your mind it's like everything's slowed way down. And it's almost like you're going like this if you're reaching it. That's how you're seeing it, and yet it's happening really, really fast. You also will often have tunnel vision. You lose your vision to the sides. You'll often have your ears sort of like close up, so you won't hear your own gun go off. Your ability to shut your ears happens in that situation, so that it's like everybody else hears loud bangs and you hear nothing. It just tunnelizes you down into what you have to look at, what you have to do, and it's part of the safety mechanism, I guess you could say, but it's also very, very disabling in a way, in what you can see and know. Here's a picture of a healthy brain, and here's one with PTSD. See how that center has shrunken down? That's what I was talking about when I said your hippocampus shrinks. The canal inside the middle of it shrinks down. And one more picture I want you to see before I finish our work here. These are the areas that keep triggering. So the PTSD patient has those areas going off like fire when they shouldn't be going off. And this one, hypo is under and hyper is active. This is someone who has I think I can do it on here. This guy? Yeah. This guy has a social anxiety. When I'm going to walk into a room, these are the things that are going off if I have anxiety. I'm getting nervous, I'm getting worked up. I got a phobia about a specific thing. These parts of my brain are firing. I'm afraid. These parts are firing. The guy with PTSD who's got a bed with a girl with PTSD, these parts are going cold instead of firing. There are some spots still fire, but parts of their brain that should work have actually gone cold instead. They've stopped working. And so just the opposite happens with this shutdown process when it gets bad enough, long enough, it can literally stop certain parts of the brain from working. We're getting pretty close on time. Yes.
All right, so we had one question come in from our viewers. The question is PTSD fairly modern? One hardly hears about PTSD after World War II, Korea, or Vietnam. But now with veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan, we hear about it constantly, even to the point, sadly, of 20 people committing suicide each day.
It is not at all modern. It was used with different terms in different generations. Are you able to come up with some of those right off? I'm going to struggle now to come up with some of the old terms.
Yeah, I read that PTSD was first diagnosed, or it began in 1980, which ironically happened to be the year I graduated from Northwestern Prep School at the time. And I think it's just been an ongoing study. Even when I was in therapy for my post-traumatic stress disorder in the 2010, 11, 12, in that area, they were still learning about it, and it used to be, they thought it was a particular incident, and it is, but it also can be a series of accumulative events, such as a child abuse, or it's repeated abuse, or police officers repeatedly.
So that's where the term began to be used. But if you think about people who were called shell-shocked in World War I or II, or I'm trying to think of the other terms like that, and I'm not coming up with them right off the top of my head, but anyone who came back unable to function in a normal way, and they didn't know how to describe it, they didn't know what it was, they weren't sure how to deal with it, that person had PTSD, and they just didn't have that same label for it at that point. It's been there as long as there have been traumatic injuries that man has done against man. So I'm going to tell you that there's been PTSD all the way back to Cain and Abel. And ever since, there's been people who have harmed people, and other people had to look at the results of what someone had done, and it was devastating to other people to see. Probably, should I be cutting you off? We're getting close to time. A little time, okay. Did you want to comment more before, or should I move on? Did you have more you want to say? Okay. I was afraid I was going to have you running past time. So this is the second picture of that same thing I just showed you, looking from the side, and it gives you a little better view of the PTSD shutdown happening, where in the brain it's happening, and how much it's happening. I just thought that was a very striking example of how we trigger normally some fear and so on mechanisms, and part of those shut down, and the brain stops having the same thinking ability because of PTSD in some cases. This is a measurement again of it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but to recognize the blue on this side over here, this is a guy with PTSD or the girl with PTSD, and the blue that doesn't exist in the other cases is that shutdown mechanism that's happening. And that's where we're going to stop with this session. I'm going to introduce any questions that you might have here in the audience here yet. Anyone who has a specific question you'd like to ask?
I just had one comment come in through the text line. They were giving you an idea of another term used before the label of PTSD was defined. Another term was battle fatigue,
yes,
which was used in Korea. Yes,
that's another one. And there are some other ones which I'm not coming up with. There are like 4 or 5 of those terms that were used in different times in history, and I'm drawing a blank. Anyone else? Any questions? Well, I want to say a special thank you to Diane for having been willing to come out today. And this is a soul-bearing and a painful thing to do. This is not easy to do, just to talk in front of people, and to talk about yourself in front of people, and to maybe introduce the fact that she could have flashbacks all over again because she came and talked about it. She might sleep less tonight because she talked about it to us. So thank you for being willing to, I guess, be a victim for us, because in a way you've done that for us. It's that intense, I understand that. Next week we're going to have another officer with us, Paula, and give you a chance once again to hear a different officer describe our work and how this work is beneficial to them. And again, thank you for the chance to be here with you.
Could I just say something in
Yes.
conclusion? Because I told you all these traumatic kinds of things, but Pastor Phil and I have talked so many times about how I would prefer it called post-traumatic transformation, because that's what it has done for me. God used Pastor Phil as a chaplain at the time. He was instrumental in ministering to my broken spirit and bringing me back to the flock. And since that time, he invited me to take chaplain courses with him to heal my faith. And I finished my studies, and I'm now a chaplain for first responders. So if any of you are in pain because of a family member who has PTSD, it's not the worst thing that could happen. Just wait, God's not finished.
Thank you. That was a great way to end. And Diane and I invite you to be part of our PTSD support group. If you have this kind of a situation going on in your life, feel free to contact me, and we'd be glad to help you more deeply. We'll close with prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for our opportunity once again to come together, to talk, to discuss, to understand this pain. We know, dear Lord, that you understand all pain. You've endured everything. And yet we understand that this pain is so deep for those who undergo it. And so we ask you not only to be with them and to guide them and to keep them, but to help us in our understanding and our support of them, that all that we do might be to your glory and to their blessing, to the growth of your kingdom. Amen. Thank you.